The sound of progress was a lie. Here, at the future site of Viridian Heights, progress was the high-pitched shriek of a grinder against a steel I-beam, the mournful groan of a crane hoisting a concrete skeleton, the percussive machine gun blast of a nail gun. It was the guttural roar of a diesel generator and the insistent, rhythmic beeping of a reversing truck, a symphony of ambition. But to Dr. Elena Vance, the air carried a different, more discordant tune. It was sharp with the metallic tang of ozone from a welder's torch, a scent like a distant thunderstorm, and thick with the damp, earthy smell of churned red mud and curing concrete. Grit, a fine powder of Atlantic clay and pulverized potential, settled on her skin and in her throat. The August sun was not just an oppressive weight, it was a physical presence, a blast furnace that bleached the sky to a pale, hazy blue and cooked the very air she breathed. She stood apart from the chaos, a solitary island of stillness, a vision in a cream linen dress that fell to her ankles, the fabric a stark, clean rebellion against the site's uniform grime. One hand rested instinctively on the pronounced, perfect curve of her belly, a gesture of unconscious protection and primal connection. A small life shifted within, a gentle flutter against her palm. Her other hand held a tablet, its screen glowing with the intricate blue lines of the building she had designed. The building they were mangling! Chin up. She had decided this was her third visit this week and her sixth in the last 2 weeks. Each time, she documented the discrepancies with a mounting sense of dread. The cheaper, non-specified composite panels, people, the altered angles on the load-bearing columns, the slow, creeping betrayal of her design, a design that was meant to be a masterpiece of light and air, a new, breathing icon for the Atlanta skyline. Her legacy. Across the churned-up earth, a junior engineer in a pristine hard hat and a high-visibility vest that looked like it had been put on for the first time that morning, watched her. Liam Chen. He was new, barely out of Georgia Tech. He was always watching. His own tablet was angled just so, its screen dark to an outside observer. He saw the woman in cream arrive, saw the way her shoulders squared as she stepped out of her car, saw the rigid set of her jaw. He saw her now, a statue of defiance in a field of ruin. He said nothing. Then, the power couple arrived. Marcus Thorne, the site foreman, moved through the mud and debris, not like a man walking on it, but like a man commanding it to part for him. His custom, Agnelli suit, a tailored masterpiece of charcoal wool, was a dark void against the sun-blasted landscape. It was an absurd choice of attire, a theatrical declaration that the dirt he walked on was beneath him. Beside him, a slash of crimson. Cassandra Hayes, lead developer for Apex, wore a red dress so vibrant it seemed to hum, drawing the eye and holding it captive. Gold chains, thick and heavy, clanked at her wrist, each movement a small, sharp announcement of her presence. She laughed, a sound like ice chipping against a crystal glass, bright and without warmth. Marcus saw Elena. The smile slid from his face, a mask dropping into place. He changed direction with the fluid, economical movement of a predator sighting unexpected prey. Cassandra, without missing a beat, followed, her stiletto heels sinking into the soft ground with each deliberate, contemptuous step, leaving a trail of perfect, deep punctures in the earth. They stopped a few feet from her, close enough to cast her in their dual shadow. The workers on the perimeter, sensing the shift in atmospheric pressure, slowed, a grinder whined down. A hammer fell silent. An audience was gathering. Well, well, well. Marcus's voice was a low rumble, meant to carry over the din that he had just extinguished. Look what the dust blew in. Cassandra snickered, a dismissive flick of her wrist, sending a blinding shard of sunlight glancing off her jewelry and into Elena's eyes. Darling, I think she's lost. The maternity clinic is 2 blocks over. Elena did not look at Cassandra. Her eyes were fixed on Marcus, the architect of this confrontation. My name is on the blueprints, Marcus. I have a right to be here. A right? He took a step closer, invading her space. He was a mountain of dark wool and cologne, a spicy, expensive scent that battled with the site's raw odors. Rights are for people who sign the checks. You, Dr. Vance, are a hired hand, a pencil, and your work here is done. Your team is deviating from the approved plans, Elena stated, her voice tight but even. The structural integrity of the west-facing arches. White! He threw his head back and laughed. It was a hollow, ugly sound, swallowed by the vastness of the construction pit. It was a performance, and it was all for her. The arches. You hear that, Cassandra? She's worried about her precious arches. He began to pace, a performer warming up his stage. This is Atlanta, Doctor. We don't build poetry here. We build assets. We build vertical real estate. This tower is about steel and glass and profit margins, brutal, beautiful, simple things. It is not about your delicate sensibilities or your whimsical curves. He gestured around them with a sweeping, dismissive hand, at the half-formed structure clawing its way into the sky. I am a builder. I take mud and muscle and I forge empires. I pour foundations that will last 100 years. What do? You draw pictures. You dream up little fantasies on a screen that have no place in the real world of commerce, of power. Elena's hand tightened on her belly. The baby kicked, a sharp, sudden jab, as if responding to the aggression in the air. The client approved my design. Apex Developments approved my design. The client approved a concept, Marcus corrected, his voice dripping with condescension. He circled her now, a shark in tailored wool. And Apex is agile. We adapt. We find efficiencies. Something a woman who spent 8 years in a university bubble learning about sacred geometries could never understand. Cassandra stepped forward then, her red nails a stark contrast as she plucked the tablet from Elena's unresisting hand. She swiped a finger across the screen, feigning interest. Oh, these are lovely, sweetie. Very artistic. But the cost per square foot on this cantilevered balcony is a nightmare. And the imported Italian marble for the lobby? We found a much more prudent alternative from China. She handed the tablet back to Marcus as if it were contaminated. He held it at arm's length, a look of profound disgust on his face. You see, this is the problem. You come down here from your ivory tower with your perfect little drawings and your precious little baby bump, thinking you can tell men of action how to do their jobs. He was close enough now that she could see the fine weave of his suit, smell the expensive, spicy scent he wore. It mingled with the stench of diesel fuel and her own sweat, creating something nauseating. You think you can build a legacy when you can't even see your own feet? His voice dropped, becoming a venomous whisper for her alone, yet loud enough for the silent, watching men to catch the drift. He glanced pointedly at her stomach. You are soft. You are distracted. This project needs a killer instinct, and all you have is a nesting instinct. Tears pricked Elena's eyes, hot and sharp. Humiliation burned in her cheeks. She would not let them fall. She would not scream. Her throat was a knot of cement, and she forced herself to breathe, a slow inhale, a shaky exhale. He wasn't done. He never was. "I am the reality of this building," he gloated, tapping his chest with two thick fingers. "I am the sweat and the noise and the sheer force of will that makes things happen. Cassandra is the money. She finds it, she directs it, she multiplies it." He gestured to Elena with the tablet, holding it up like evidence of a crime. You are a ghost, a preliminary sketch. The pretty idea we had before we got serious." With a final, theatrical toss. It didn't fly far. It seemed to hang in the air for a moment, a perfect black rectangle against the red clay before flipping over. It landed face down in a puddle of muddy water and gravel. The sound was not loud, but it was horrifyingly distinct, a wet, sickening crunch. Her design now gone. The silence that followed was immense, a vacuum that sucked all the air from the site. Marcus straightened his tie, the picture of composure. He gave a small, satisfied nod, as if concluding a board meeting. He turned to Cassandra, offering his arm with a flourish. "Come, my dear. I believe we have a reservation at Bacchanalia. I am in the mood for champagne." Cassandra gave Elena one last, triumphant smirk, a final twist of the knife. The clank of her bracelets echoed as they walked away, their confident strides leaving Elena standing alone in the sudden, deafening quiet. The workers, one by one, as if a spell had been broken, turned back to their tasks, refusing to meet her eyes. The symphony of construction resumed, but now it sounded only like noise, brutal and meaningless. Elena looked from their retreating forms, a splash of red and a pillar of black, to the broken tablet half submerged in the mud. Her design, her work, her name, drowning, drowning. A wave of dizziness washed over her. The sun beat down, turning the world white at the edges. The horizon of cranes and steel beams tilted on its axis, a slow, sickening spin. Her hand, slick with sweat, slipped from her belly. The ground, littered with gravel and dust, rushed up to meet her. She sank into the filth. The world went dark, the sun-baked earth rushing up to meet her in a swirl of red dust and humiliation. For a moment, she was lost in the cold embrace of unconsciousness, but the primal urge to protect the life within her stirred. Even before her eyes fully opened, she felt the jarring reality of the ground beneath her. The ground, hard and unforgiving, was a sharp sting against her cheek. Dust, gritty and metallic, filled her mouth, catching in her throat, a sickening, acrid taste. The roar of the construction site, so recently silenced by Marcus's cruel pantomime, now rushed back, a deafening wave crashing over her. Each hammer blow, each guttural thrum of machinery resonated deep within her skull, a painful echo, her vision blurred, the world a kaleidoscope of red dust and bleached sky. A hot, acrid taste coated her tongue, the bitter aftermath of public shame. She lay there, a crumpled heap in the red Atlanta clay, the cream linen of her dress now stained with mud and shame. Her limbs felt heavy, disconnected from her will. "Breathe! Just breathe!" The directive came from a primal place, a whisper through the din of her ringing ears. Her chest heaved, a desperate attempt to pull air into lungs that felt compressed. The oppressive August heat clung to her, a suffocating blanket, yet a deep, cold tremor ran through her. The thudding in her chest was not just her own frantic heartbeat. It was a rhythmic, insistent beat, a small, vibrant life asserting its presence. Aaliyah, a hand slick with sweat and grime, found its way to her belly, a protective shield against the world, against the pain, against everything. The soft curve beneath her palm was the only solid, unyielding thing in a universe that had just dissolved into chaos. This fragile, precious life, this was all that mattered. The fierce, maternal instinct bloomed in her chest, pushing back against the black tide of despair. A shadow fell over her, not the long, contemptuous shadow of Marcus or Cassandra, but a softer, hesitant one, a quiet presence. A new scent reached her, not the heavy cologne of the foreman, but something clean, sterile. Muted construction sounds, a subtle rustle of fabric. A hand, gentle yet firm, touched her shoulder. Not pulling, not pushing, just there. A silent offer. Elena blinked, trying to clear the blurring film from her eyes. The figure above her was indistinct, a silhouette against the blinding sky. She felt a strong, steady arm slip beneath her, supporting her weight. She was lifted, not roughly, but with a careful, almost reverent solicitude, as if she were made of glass. Each movement was deliberate, slow, allowing her body to adjust. The world spun. She closed her eyes, leaning into the unexpected support, the cool fabric of a uniform against her cheek, smelling faintly of clean laundry and raw concrete. She was guided step by step across the rough terrain. The small stones bit into the soles of her shoes, but the arm around her remained a steadfast anchor. The journey was a haze. She was dimly aware of the muffled thud of her own heartbeat, the rhythmic crunch of gravel beneath their feet, the distant, indistinguishable shouts of workers. The world was narrowed to the sensation of her own body, the faint nausea churning in her gut, and the quiet strength beside her. They stopped. A door creaked open, exhaling a puff of dry, stale air. The smell of dust and old wood, faintly metallic, filled her nostrils. She was led inside, the sudden dimness a relief from the harsh glare outside. Another gentle push, and she was seated on something hard and cold. Her hands, trembling, went back to her belly, a reflexive movement. Her eyes slowly adjusted. She was in a small, utilitarian space, corrugated metal walls, scarred and dull, pressed in. A single bare bulb hung from the ceiling, casting a sickly yellow glow that did little to dispel the gloom. On a rickety table, a small first aid kit, its white surface grimy, sat amidst spare tools and coiled cables. This was not luxury. This was a forgotten corner, a place for discarded things. A cool, damp cloth pressed against her forehead. The sudden cold was a shock, a jolt that brought a sharp clarity to her reeling mind. She flinched, but the hand holding the cloth was unwavering. The touch was impersonal yet kind. No words, no questions, just simple, quiet care. She opened her eyes fully now. Liam Chen, the junior engineer. He stood before her, his face devoid of expression, but his eyes, behind the wire-rimmed glasses, held a quiet concern. His pristine hard hat was gone, replaced by a dark baseball cap, but the high-visibility vest remained, a splash of stark yellow against the muted backdrop. He offered her a small plastic bottle of water. She took it, her fingers clumsy, and brought it to her lips. The water was lukewarm, tasting faintly of plastic, but it was a lifeline. She drank small sips, her throat still tight. Liam sat on an overturned bucket opposite her. not looking directly at her, but surveying the small room, his gaze resting briefly on the dusty floor, then the peeling paint of the doorframe. He gave no indication of the scene he had witnessed, the public spectacle. He offered no pity, no judgment, just presence, a silent companion in the aftermath. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, broken only by the muffled sounds of the sight and Elena's shaky breathing. The cold cloth on her forehead helped calm the throbbing in her temples. The initial nausea began to recede, leaving behind a dull ache. She felt the tiny flutter within her, Aaliyah's gentle reminder, her lifeline. She looked at Liam, truly looked at him. He was young, his face still held the softness of youth, but there was a gravitas in his stillness. He simply waited. He wasn't trying to fix her. He wasn't offering empty platitudes. He was just there, a quiet, steady anchor in the wreckage of her pride. After a long moment, he rose. He walked to the rickety table, picked up a small folded business card, and placed it on the rough wooden surface next to her. He didn't say anything, just indicated the card with a slight nod. Then he turned, opened the door, and stepped out into the blinding light. The door closed with a soft thud, leaving her in the dim, dusty silence once more. She stared at the card. It was plain, white, with a simple name and number. Liam Chen, Junior Engineer. No company logo, no apex developments, just a personal contact, a private act of quiet defiance. A secret extended hand. Elena felt a slow burn in her chest, a different kind of heat than the sun's oppressive blaze. It was the heat of humiliation, yes, but also a simmering anger. Not for the first time, she pressed both hands firmly against her belly. Aaliyah kicked again, a stronger, more definite jab, a signal, a promise. She would not cry, not again, not in public. Never again would she give them the satisfaction. The weakness she felt now, the tremor in her hands, the sting of tears behind her eyes, it was hers alone, to be contained, to be transformed. They had laughed at her, dismissed her, broken her work. They had tried to break her spirit. They had failed. They would continue to fail. A cold, clear resolve settled over her, sharp as glass. This was not a defeat. This was a declaration. They wanted a fight. They would get one, not with tears, not with pleas, with something far more devastating. She rose, slowly, carefully. The ache in her head was still there, but her vision was steady. The faint ringing in her ears had softened to a low hum. Her linen dress was stained, a tangible mark of the day's brutality. She looked down at it, then at her hands, still grimy from the fall. She would clean herself. She would stand tall. Her chin lifted, a chilling resolve. A moment of quiet contemplation settled over the construction site. With Liam's quiet act of kindness igniting a flicker of defiance, Elena found a new, cold resolve hardening within her. But as she plotted her next uncertain steps in the sterile quiet miles away, insulated from the site's grime and despair, Marcus and Cassandra celebrated their perceived victory in a world far removed from mud and shattered dreams. The air in Bacchanalia was a different element, a substance scrubbed clean of the city's grit and grime. You felt it the moment you passed the heavy oak doors, a pressure change in the ears as the humid Atlanta night was left for dead. The atmosphere inside was cool, meticulously conditioned and layered with the decadent, almost sacred sense of truffle oil, roasting duck, and vintage Bordeaux. It was an environment of hushed reverence, where the conversations of power brokers and old money were low, conspiratorial murmurs, and the most aggressive sound was the distant, delicate clink of a fork against fine china. The texture of the evening was in the starched, impossibly heavy linen of the tablecloth, a white so pure it seemed to absorb the low light, and the deep, plush crushed velvet of the corner banquette where Marcus and Cassandra were nestled, their own private throne room. Marcus swirled the dark red liquid in his enormous balloon-like glass of vintage red wine. He watched the wine cling to the crystal in thick, slow-moving legs, a syrupy testament to its quality. A slow, predatory smile spread across his face, crinkling the corners of his eyes, not with humor, but with a deep, satisfying cruelty. "Did you see her face?" he murmured, his voice a low purr that was still perfectly audible in the engineered quiet. The shock. The slow-motion crumble as she realized everyone was watching. It was a masterpiece of demolition. Cassandra laughed, a sound as sharp and bright as a breaking champagne flute against the restaurant's quiet symphony. The heavy, layered gold of her antique necklace caught the low, directional light, throwing a warm, buttery glow onto the crimson silk of her dress. When she actually hit the mud, perfection! Her little white linen dress, completely ruined. She used a long silver fork to spear a single perfect raspberry from a shared plate of panna cotta, her nails lacquered in a red so dark it was almost black, like drops of dried blood against the pristine white cream. She brought the berry to her lips, biting into it with a deliberate slowness. A little earth for our earthy architect. She looked like a sad, dirty angel, a fallen statue. She is a sad, dirty angel. Marcus took a slow, considered sip of wine, closing his eyes for a moment as he savored the complex notes of blackberry, cigar box, and victory. She came to the site last month talking about poetry, about the land's sacred geometries. Can you imagine? He let out a soft, contemptuous huff of air. This isn't a church, it's a monument to capital. A 40-story glass and steel middle finger to the sky. You can't build an empire with poetry. He set the glass down with a decisive, resonant click that made the waiter, hovering 10 feet away, flinch. The paperwork is all ready, has been for weeks. A new attentiveness sharpened Cassandra's features, erasing the last traces of mirth. The playful smirk was gone, replaced by a negotiator's intense focus. She leaned forward, the silk of her dress rustling softly. "Define ready!" "Ready to file." He leaned back into the velvet, expansive and triumphant, a king surveying his domain. He began to list his victories on his fingers, tapping each one against the crisp linen. 1. The divorce petition, citing irreconcilable differences in mental anguish. My mental anguish, naturally. 2. A full forensic breakdown of her spending versus her income for the last 5 years, highlighting her financial dependency. 3. An asset transfer to 3 new offshore holding companies that our friend in the Caymans, the ever-reliable Mr. Jean-Pierre, set up last month. And 4. He paused for effect, his eyes glinting. The preliminary motion for sole custody of the child. Cassandra's eyes widened slightly, the only crack in her composed facade. Custody? Already? Marcus, that's bold, even for you. Why not? His voice was a low, confident rumble. She's unstable. We've been documenting it for months, prone to emotional outbursts, cries at board meetings, faints in public. He gestured vaguely with his wineglass, a gesture that encompassed the entire world outside their velvet booth. Today was a gift, the universe validating my strategy. I have a dozen witnesses, investors, city officials who saw her collapse under the slightest pressure. Who would the court trust? A hysterical, unemployed artist who talks to trees? Or the man who is building half of downtown Atlanta and paying the taxes of the judge's entire neighborhood? She reached across the table, her hand covering his. Her stack of gold and diamond bracelets was cold against his skin, a stark contrast to the warmth of his triumph. I want to see the papers, Marcus, all of them, and I want more than your leftover scraps. I'm done with consulting fees and bonuses. Her gaze was unwavering. I want equity, a real stake in Viridian Heights. He pulled his hand away, not with anger, but with the smooth, unhurried motion of a man reclaiming his space. He looked past her, his gaze unfocused, seeing something in the middle distance, a future, a dynasty. My father worked rebar on the SunTrust Plaza build 40 years ago. Came home every day with his hands shredded and bleeding, his back bent into a permanent question mark, smelled of concrete dust and cheap beer. He shook his head. He believed in working hard and waiting your turn for a reward. He died waiting. I learned all I needed to know from him. Waiting gets you nothing. The moment of reflection passed, and the mask of the shark slid back into place. He looked directly at her, his focus absolute. You want a promise? He leaned forward, his voice a venomous, conspiratorial whisper. Elena thinks she has this fire inside her, this artist spirit that no one can touch. She told me once, her strength, like the legacy of this land, is non-negotiable. He chuckled, a dry, dismissive sound that was far more insulting than a laugh. It's a fantasy! A story she tells herself to get through the night while I'm with you. She is nothing but a beautiful, preliminary sketch I'm about to erase. That seemed to satisfy Cassandra. A slow, triumphant smile returned to her lips. She had pushed, and he had given her the cruelty she needed to feel secure. Now, for her masterstroke. She placed a hand on her own flat stomach, a deliberate, theatrical mimicry of the woman they had just destroyed. Her voice was soft, almost shy, but the words were a tactical explosion designed to level the field. There's something else. Marcus was still enjoying his own vicious poetry, replaying the scene in his mind. What? I'm pregnant! The air shifted, the carefully curated atmosphere of the restaurant collapsing into a dull, background roar in his ears. Marcus stared at her. His expression, for the first time in years, was not one of control or arrogance, but of genuine, unscripted shock. His mouth opened slightly. Then, as the seconds stretched, the shock melted away, replaced by a slow, dawning sense of ultimate triumph. A son, a new heir, a clean slate, untainted by art and poetry. He saw it all in an instant. Are you? He couldn't finish the question, the words thick in his throat. 2 months, she lied, her face a mask of serene sincerity. I found out last week. I was going to tell you tonight anyway. This just makes it cleaner. He believed her. The thought that she might be lying, that this might be the most brilliant and ruthless move on the entire chessboard, never entered his mind. His ego was a fortress, too vast and too well defended to accommodate such a possibility. He had won. He had won everything. He reached into the inner pocket of his suit jacket and pulled out his phone. The sleek black rectangle of glass and steel was a weapon, and he was its master. He swiped the screen, found the contact, and pressed the button. He didn't wait for a greeting. "It's time. File it all." His voice was cold, sharp, the sound of a guillotine dropping, the divorce, the asset shield, and the motion for primary custody. Cite emotional instability. Public incident today at the groundbreaking. We have witnesses. He listened for a moment, his eyes fixed on his own faint reflection in the dark restaurant window. He saw the tailored suit, the confident posture, the world at his feet. A ghost of a smile touched his lips as he watched Cassandra calmly take a sip of water, a silent, complicit queen. "Yes," he said, his voice flat, devoid of all emotion. "Effective immediately." He ended the call, placing the phone face down on the pristine white linen with the finality of a gavel strike. He picked up his wine glass, the dark liquid, a perfect, still pool. He held it up, not to Cassandra, but to the powerful, victorious man staring back at him from the glass. He had won. A brief hush fell over the decadent restaurant, a pause in the relentless machinations. Marcus, basking in the glow of his calculated cruelty and newly asserted power, believed he had perfectly executed his grand plan. Yet, even as he raised his glass in triumph, the quiet machinations of his victory had already begun to tighten around Elena Vance, unseen, unheard, slowly strangling the familiar comforts of her life. The penthouse apartment hummed with a false quiet, the kind that settles after a storm but holds the promise of another. It was a silence that felt less like peace and more like a held breath, a taut string vibrating just beyond the edge of hearing. The morning light, usually a gentle wash through the expansive floor-to-ceiling windows, now seemed to press in, almost aggressively bright, illuminating dust motes dancing in the still air. Elena, clad in a cream silk robe that felt soft and cool against her skin, moved through the sun-drenched space. The luxurious fabric whispered against her bare legs with each careful step. The air, usually thick with the faint, invigorating scent of her morning espresso and the delicate bloom of orchids, a particular fragrant phalaenopsis she cherished, now felt thin, almost brittle. Stripped of its familiar comforts. A dull ache, a persistent, throbbing rhythm, resonated behind her eyes, a constant physical reminder of yesterday's brutal theater, of the public humiliation and the scathing words that had sliced through her. Her hand drifted, almost unconsciously, to her belly, a soft, involuntary caress. "Aliyah!" The name echoed in her mind, a tremor of reassurance, a flicker of defiance against the encroaching dread. This child, this new life, was hers and hers alone. She needed air, she needed to walk, to feel the solid ground beneath her feet, to escape the suffocating quiet of her gilded cage. Her keycard, sleek and silver, cool against her fingertips, slid into the door's reader with a familiar click. Nothing. The small green light that usually affirmed access remained dark. She tried again, a surge of irritation mixing with a growing unease. This time, a tiny, almost imperceptible red light blinked, a silent, damning rejection, a digital sneer. A new smart lock, a discreet metallic panel, had been installed overnight, its sterile scent of new plastics a sharp, chemical contrast to the familiar warmth of the dark walnut and worn leather of her home. It smelled alien, imposing, Her code, the intricate sequence she'd used for years, a personal shorthand to her sanctuary, didn't register. The digits felt heavy and wrong beneath her thumb. Access denied. The words didn't appear, but they screamed in her mind. A cold dread, sharp and penetrating, seeped into her bones, chilling her despite the warmth of the rising sun streaming through the windows. The silk robe, so comforting moments ago, now felt flimsy, offering no protection. Panic, sharp and sudden, clawed at her throat, a raw primal instinct. She fought it back, her jaw clenching. Chin up! She was Elena Vance, not some flighty damsel. She reached for her phone, its cool, smooth surface, a brief comfort, calling her driver, the ever-dependable Michael. His number rang once, twice, then clicked to a pre-recorded message. Michael's voice, usually so steady and reassuring, was replaced by a clipped, automated female tone. We regret to inform you that service to this number has been temporarily suspended. Please contact your account administrator. Service suspended. The words hung in the air, a final, definitive cut. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the silence. Her breath hitched. She hailed a taxi from the street below, leaning out the window, the fresh morning air doing little to calm her racing pulse. She fumbled for her wallet, her fingers clumsy with rising anxiety. The familiar black card, her primary account embossed with her name, felt solid and reassuring in her hand. The driver, a kind, elderly man with a gentle smile and tired eyes, watched her patiently in his rearview mirror as she swiped the card. "Declined," he said, his voice soft, apologetic. She tried another, a backup platinum card. "Declined." Again, the gentle, sympathetic shrug from the driver, his gaze filled with a quiet pity that stung more than any anger. Shame, hot and bitter, burned her cheeks, a humiliating blush spreading across her face. She mumbled an apology, retrieved her cards, and stepped out, walking, the pavement rough beneath her bare feet. The city street roared around her, a cacophony of morning traffic, the throaty growl of delivery trucks, the insistent blare of car horns, the hiss of pneumatic brakes, and the overlapping shouts of pedestrians, their voices a blurred tapestry of urban urgency. Exhaust fumes, acrid and heavy, mingled with the faint, sweet smell of street vendor coffee and the cloying perfume of cheap pastries. She navigated the rough pavement, her cream silk robe feeling dangerously fragile, indecently exposed in the harsh, unforgiving urban light. She pulled up her banking app on her phone, her thumb trembling slightly as she authenticated. The screen glowed, stark and unforgiving. Every account, every line of credit, every joint asset with Marcus Thorne, frozen, zero. The number shimmered on the screen, an abyss of nothingness. A clean slate, meticulously scrubbed clean of her existence. Her car, her sleek black sedan, a discreet symbol of her independence, was nowhere in the building's garage. The vast concrete space, usually filled with the glint of polished metal, felt hollow and cavernous. It had simply vanished like everything else. A text message vibrated against her palm, a sudden, jarring buzz that pulled her from the depths of her despair. The screen lit up, showing a name she recognized instantly. Brenda, Marcus's administrative assistant. The words, clipped and urgent, appeared on the screen, a chillingly precise digital whisper. "Elena, I know this is awful. I heard what happened yesterday. Please come to Apex. Marcus is in a meeting with the legal team in conference room C. I think you need to see this. I'm so sorry." a sudden lifeline, or a lure. The message felt too earnest, too perfectly timed. Was this genuine concern, or a calculated trap designed to draw her into the spider's web? Elena's jaw tightened, a muscle jumping in her cheek. Her heart, still hammering, now picked up a new, furious beat. She had to know. The uncertainty, the not knowing, was a torment she could no longer endure. A deep breath allowed Elena to steady herself. Stripped bare of her finances and her sanctuary, Elena clung to the slender thread of Brenda's message, a dangerous gamble born of desperate resolve. She hailed a taxi, her destination, the glittering monument to Marcus's ambition, knowing that only by confronting him directly could she hope to pierce the chilling veil of her dispossession. The marble and glass facade of Apex Developments loomed, a fitting stage for her final, desperate gamble. The Apex Developments lobby was a cathedral of cold, polished granite and glass, an artificial glacier in the heart of Atlanta. The sheer scale of it was meant to impress, to dwarf, to assert dominance. The air, conditioned to a frigid perfection that nipped at her bare skin, held the faint chemical scent of expensive cleaning agents and the sharper, metallic tang of ambition. Elena, now in a simple cream linen dress she'd salvaged from a forgotten gym bag, a stark contrast to her earlier silk, felt the stares. The hushed whispers of employees who averted their gazes as she passed, their faces suddenly intent on their phones or distant corners of the room. She felt like an exhibit, a cautionary tale. She walked, chin high, her spine a rigid line of defiance, a fragile ship sailing through hostile waters, the click of her modest heels echoing unnervingly on the polished floor. Brenda, in a smart charcoal suit that seemed to absorb all light, met her at the elevator banks, her face a mask of concerned sincerity. Her lips were pressed into a thin line, her brows slightly furrowed, too concerned. Her eyes, however, flitted nervously, never quite meeting Elena's. "Elena, thank God you came! I tried calling you." Brenda's voice was a soft, anxious murmur, barely above a whisper, as if afraid to be overheard. She reached out, a hesitant hand touching Elena's arm, then quickly withdrew it. "Marcus, he's just being unbelievable. He's completely unreasonable. I don't understand how he could do this to you." The elevator, a sleek capsule of brushed steel and smoked glass, whisked them upwards, the silent ascent a prelude to a reckoning. Elena watched the city shrink below, a world she was rapidly losing her footing in. Brenda led her down a pristine hallway, the muted carpet absorbing some of the sound, but each step still echoing the hollow beat of Elena's own heart. The air in the hallway was even colder than the lobby, a sterile chill that seemed to seep into her very bones. She paused outside the frosted glass door of Conference Room C, the faint silhouettes of figures visible within. "He's in there," Brenda whispered, her hand hovering near the door handle, her knuckles white. Her voice was strained, on the verge of breaking. He needs to understand." "Maybe if he sees you, Elena, sees the human cost of all this, he'll back down. He has to. He's gone too far." Her eyes flickered with something unreadable. Fear? Guilt? Before dropping to the floor. Elena pushed the door open, the heavy glass swinging inward with a soft, almost imperceptible sigh of air. The room was bathed in the cool, sterile light of a dozen recessed fixtures, casting long, stark shadows. Marcus sat at the head of a long, polished oak table, its surface gleaming, reflecting the cold light. He was flanked by 3 grim-faced lawyers in bespoke dark suits, their expressions as unyielding as granite, their posture stiff and formal. Cassandra, a vibrant slash of crimson in a designer dress that hugs her figure, her heavy gold bracelets glinting defiantly with every slight movement, occupied a chair beside him, a faint, cruel smile playing on her meticulously painted lips. She took a slow sip from a crystal water glass, her eyes fixed on Elena with undisguised malice. The air here smelled not just of expensive leather and polished wood, but of unyielding certainty, of victory preordained. On the table before Marcus, a formidable stack of crisp legal documents, meticulously arranged, formed a silent barrier. His eyes, cold and triumphant, glinted with a predatory satisfaction as they locked onto Elena. "Ah, Dr. Vance, just the woman we wanted to see." Marcus's voice, a low rumble, filled the room, amplified by the hard surfaces, by the very silence that had preceded her entry. It carried a false warmth, a thinly veiled condescension that grated on her nerves. He gestured with an open palm to an empty chair directly opposite him, a theatrical sweep of his hand. "Please do join us. We're just finalizing a few arrangements. Important matters, you understand?" His gaze lingered on her, a chilling appraisal. Elena walked to the chair, her gaze unwavering, meeting his challenge head-on. She did not sit. The polished wood of the chair felt cold, uninviting, a trap. She stood erect and unbowed, her linen dress a simple shield against their opulent armor. Her hand almost instinctively found her belly, a subtle anchor, a silent promise to the life within her. "Arrangements?" she asked, her voice steady, betraying none of the tremor that shook her insides, none of the cold dread that still gripped her heart. Her voice, though soft, seemed to cut through the heavy air of the room, forcing Marcus to pause. A palpable tension settled in the room. Marcus leaned back in his leather chair, a dark predator surveying his prey, a smug satisfaction creasing the corners of his eyes. Yes, arrangements, quite comprehensive, actually. He steepled his fingers, his gaze unwavering, a small, knowing smile playing on his lips. "Your driver? Your credit cards? Your access to the apartment? Your bank accounts?" All standard procedure, of course. We simply ensured you wouldn't be able to interfere with the proceedings. Or, shall we say, make any more public spectacles of yourself, as you are so prone to doing. He chuckled, a dry, dismissive sound that was devoid of humor. It was a sound designed to belittle, to wound. The lawyers remained impassive, their faces blank canvases, their silence complicit. Cassandra's smile widened, a thin, cruel slash of red, and she shifted in her seat, the gold bracelets on her wrist glinting like tiny Victoria's eyes. "We can't have you disrupting important corporate discussions with theatrical displays of emotion, can we, Elena? It's simply not good for business." Elena's jaw tightened. She could feel the blood thrumming behind her temples, but she held his gaze. "This is not just about the construction, Marcus. This is personal. You're destroying everything. You're tearing down my life, brick by emotional brick, just as you tear down buildings." "Everything?" He laughed again, louder this time, a harsh, braying sound that echoed off the high ceilings. "My dear, naive Elena, you had nothing. You were nothing before me. You are a dreamer, an artist, a woman who sees acrid geometries in a plot of dirt that could house a lucrative development. I am a builder of empires. I create something tangible, something of worth. And quite frankly, your condition is inconvenient, emotionally unstable, unpredictable. Not exactly the image I need for my public profile, is it? He picked up a sheaf of crisp papers, their edges sharp and precise, sliding them across the polished table, not to Elena, but to a lawyer on his right. A man with a severe haircut and rimless glasses. These are the divorce papers, standard, citing irreconcilable differences, emotional instability, public outbursts, all supported by yesterday's unfortunate display, which, I must admit, played perfectly into our hands. He paused, a flicker of cold amusement in his eyes, before sliding another document forward, this one thicker, more ominous. And these, he tapped the document with a perfectly manicured finger. These are the preliminary motions for sole custody. A mother of your temperament, your vulnerability, is simply not suitable. Not in the eyes of the court, certainly not in the eyes of public opinion. Think of the precedent, the reputation. He stood, pushing his chair back with a soft scrape that seemed deafening in the suddenly hushed room. He walked slowly around the table, his movements deliberate, predatory, until he stood directly in front of her, his imposing height casting a shadow over her. His dark suit, perfectly tailored, felt like a canvas of absolute, unyielding power, radiating authority and control. You always thought your artistic soul, your emotional strength, was some kind of shield, some kind of special gift that set you apart. His voice dropped, losing its boardroom polish, becoming a venomous whisper meant for her ears alone, meant to burrow into her deepest fears. But it's a weakness, Elena. A gaping wound in a world that respects only power, only leverage. You're just a pretty face with pretty ideas, a porcelain doll that shatters at the first real hit, at the first sign of pressure. And that baby inside you? He looked down at her belly, a flicker of something cold and calculating, utterly devoid of warmth or human connection in his eyes. That's just another liability? Another weakness to exploit, a complication I can use. Elena felt a sharp, intense pain, not physical but deep in her soul, a tearing, wrenching agony that stole her breath. Aaliyah, the name, her secret hope, felt brutally exposed. Her hand pressed harder against her belly, a silent vow, a desperate attempt to shield her child from his venom. She took a deep breath, the scent of expensive leather and Marcus's cologne filling her lungs, steadying herself, channeling her pain into a cold, fierce resolve. "You won't break me," she stated, her voice stronger than she thought possible, a raw, defiant whisper. Marcus smiled, a chillingly confident display, utterly devoid of warmth. "Oh, my dear, I already have. You just haven't realized it yet. It's only a matter of time." He turned, dismissing her, his attention already shifting. He glanced at Brenda, who still stood by the door, her eyes cast down, avoiding Elena's gaze. "Brenda, ensure Dr. Vance is escorted out discreetly, and see that her personal effects are delivered to a suitable address, perhaps a hotel. We don't want any further inconvenience." His tone was casual, as if discussing a minor logistical detail. Brenda nodded, her face unmoving, a mask of obedience. The betrayal, sharp and cold, cut deeper than any of Marcus's calculated words. It was a quieter, more intimate wound. Elena looked at her, a silent question in her eyes, a plea for some sign of shared humanity, some flicker of remorse. Brenda merely gestured towards the door, her hand shaking almost imperceptibly, her expression unreadable. Elena turned, her chin high, her spine rigid, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. She walked out of the glass-walled room, away from the triumphant glares, the hushed whispers that felt like daggers in her back. The heavy door clicked shut behind her, a final, definitive sound. The lobby, once merely cold and imposing, now felt like a vast, empty wasteland, an Arctic expanse designed to swallow small, vulnerable figures like her. Her footsteps echoed hollowly, a solitary beat in the sterile silence. She stepped out onto the street, the sun, a brutal glare, harsh and unforgiving against her sensitive eyes, feeling the clamor of the city like a physical assault after the controlled silence of Apex. The city pulsed around her, indifferent, uncaring, dispossessed, stripped bare. A moment of quiet contemplation settled in the city streets. Her phone vibrated again, a sudden, startling buzz against her hip. It was her mother. She was alone, utterly, terrifyingly alone. The cold indifference of the Apex Tower and the crushing finality of Marcus's words had left Elena feeling more isolated than ever, a solitary figure swallowed by the uncaring city. But before the emotional wounds could even begin to heal, a new and far more urgent battle erupted, a fierce, physical demand that dwarfed all her previous struggles, thrusting her into a fight for two lives. The city ignored her. It always had. The phone trembled in her hand, her mother's name a beacon of warmth on the cold screen, but a brutal cramp, a savage clenching deep inside her, made her gasp. The phone slipped, clattering onto the gritty sidewalk. She doubled over, a hand flying to her belly. The pain was not emotional. This was a physical invasion. A sharp, searing contraction that stole her breath and sent a constellation of black stars dancing behind her eyes. Hot pavement radiated through the thin soles of her shoes. The air was a toxic soup of diesel exhaust and hot garbage. A fist of pain squeezed her womb. Again, harder. She sank to her knees on the filthy concrete, the cream linen of her dress absorbing the city's grime. Her chin was up. She would not scream. Her breath came in ragged, disciplined pants. A thin trickle of warmth ran down her inner thigh. Blood. The sight of the dark stain blossoming on the pale fabric was a terror colder than any of Marcus's threats. People flowed around her, an indifferent river of bodies, their faces buried in phones, their ears plugged with music. She was an inconvenient statue of suffering. "Hey, lady, you okay?" A voice cut through the haze. A taxi, a battered yellow vessel, had swerved to the curb. The driver, a young man with kind, worried eyes, was already out of his car. "You need a hospital, now!" He helped her into the back seat, the worn vinyl sticking to her damp skin. The cab smelled of old coffee and a pine tree air freshener that couldn't mask the scent of a million other passengers. He drove, fast, weaving through the Atlanta traffic with a focused urgency that was the first act of grace she'd felt all day. Every bump was a jolt of agony, every contraction a wave that threatened to drag her under. Hand on her belly, she focused on the driver's head, on the steady way he checked his mirrors. A stranger's competence was her only anchor. "Which hospital?" "Piedmont," she managed, the word a dry rasp. "The closest. The best." The emergency entrance of Piedmont Hospital was a world away from the street. The The air was cool, sterile, smelling sharply of antiseptic and floor polish, a clean chemical scent that scoured the city from her lungs. The sounds were hushed, the quiet squeak of rubber-soled shoes, the low hum of electronics, the calm, disembodied voice of the overhead paging system. Elena was moved from the chaos of the taxi to the controlled environment of a gurney, the transition seamless, efficient. A nurse with a calm face and capable hands began asking questions, her voice a soothing balm. "Dr. Vance, you're bleeding, and you're contracting." The nurse's hands were gentle as she checked the monitor, the rhythmic blip of the fetal heart rate suddenly erratic. "The baby's in distress. We need to call your husband." "He is not my husband," Elena said, the words precise, cut from stone. "Your partner, then. The father. We need his consent for an emergency C-section if it comes to that." Elena gave the nurse Marcus's number. A formality, a final, useless gesture. She watched the nurse dial, then listened to the one-sided conversation, her own heart echoing the frantic pattern on the screen. The nurse's face tightened. She held the phone out to Elena. "He wants to speak to you." She took the phone. The plastic was warm. "Marcus?" "This is quite a performance, Elena. Even for you." His voice was a low, infuriatingly calm rumble through the speaker. "What is it you want? A dramatic deathbed reconciliation? It's not happening. I'm in the middle of closing a deal that will make me a king in this city." "The baby," she gasped, another contraction seizing her. "Aaliyah, she's in danger." A pause. For a fleeting second, the bluster was gone. The memory surfaced. He always hated the smell of that place, like false hope and bleach. He remembers her holding his hand, her knuckles bony and her grip surprisingly strong. For a brief, flickering second, he feels the ghost of that grip on his own hand. Then, the mask slammed back down, the brief fissure in his armor sealed. "This changes nothing. It is a calculated, emotional play, and I will not be manipulated by it. Send me the bill for your theatrics." The line went dead. She dropped the phone. The nurse's expression was a mixture of pity and professional resolve. "We'll manage without him, honey." They were wheeling her towards the operating theater when a splash of color appeared at the end of the hall. A vibrant, vicious red. Cassandra! He stood there in a tailored crimson pantsuit, a phalanx of gold necklaces layered on her chest, her bracelets a cascade of glittering metal on her wrist. She wasn't looking at Elena. She was scanning the area, a predator assessing her new territory. She stopped a passing doctor, her voice loud enough to carry, sharp and clear. "Excuse me, I'm looking for Marcus Thorne's room. He's the father." She placed a hand on her own flat stomach, a gesture of audacious appropriation. "I'm his fiancée. We're expecting." The lie, so public, so venomous, was a physical blow. Elena felt the air leave her body. The world tilted, the white ceiling tiles blurring as they wheeled her past the woman in red. Cassandra met her eyes for a single, brutal moment. Her lips curved into a small, triumphant smile. She had won. Elena closed her eyes. The gurney moved faster. The lights overhead streaked into a single, blinding line. She was alone, stripped bare, her body failing her, her child in peril. The memory surfaced, Marcus's voice in the hushed, decadent air of the restaurant, dripping with contempt as he mocked her deepest belief. His words, her words, twisted into a weapon. The memory surfaced, Her strength, like the legacy of this land, is non-negotiable. The memory was meant to be the final blow, the proof of her foolishness, the epitaph of a dreamer. But in the cold, sterile darkness behind her eyelids, something shifted. The words echoed, but the meaning changed. It was not his mockery she heard, but the original truth, her truth. Chin up! A decision. The strength was not in the land, not in a building, not in a man. It was in her, and it was not negotiable. The operating room was frigid. The scent of iodine was sharp. An anesthesiologist murmured in her ear, his voice a disembodied drone. She felt a prick, then a spreading numbness. A blue curtain went up, a final wall between her and the world. There was pressure, a strange, unnerving pulling. She felt like a ship being unloaded, a vessel being emptied. The rhythmic beep of the monitors was the only sound, a frantic, mechanical heartbeat. Was it hers or her daughter's? The surgeon's voice distant. "We have her." A void, a terrifying emptiness where her daughter had been, a silent, hollow space. She held her breath, listening past the frantic drumming in her own ears, listening for a sign, for a reason. Then it came. It was not a cry. It was a sound like tearing silk, a raw, indignant gasp that clawed its way into the chilled air. It was a furious, gulping inhalation that bloomed into a thin, reedy wail. The sound vibrated through the metal of the table, through the very floor. It was a declaration, a tiny, fierce protest that shattered the sterile hum of the machines and filled every corner of the room. It was the sound of life, unnegotiable. The primal, triumphant cry of her daughter echoed in Elena's ears, a defiant roar against the sterile silence of the operating room. Exhaustion, profound and absolute, claimed her soon after, pulling her into a deep, dreamless sleep. When she finally drifted back to consciousness, the harsh glare and urgent sounds had softened into the tranquil hum of a private hospital room, a cocoon where she would finally meet the small, warm presence that was now her entire world. Hours later, she woke in a quiet, private room. The afternoon sun streamed through a large window, illuminating the soft, cream-colored walls. The air smelled of clean linen and something else, a faint, sweet, milky scent. Her body ached with a deep, profound weariness, but the sharp edges of pain had been sanded away. Nurse entered, her smile genuine. In her arms was a small bundle wrapped in a soft white blanket. Someone is very eager to meet her mother. The nurse placed the bundle in Elena's arms. The warmth, the impossible weight, was a shock. Elena looked down. A perfect, miniature face, still wrinkled and new, was framed by a dusting of dark hair. Tiny, perfect lips, a tiny, perfect nose. Aliyah, her daughter. The baby stirred, and a small hand, with fingers as delicate as spun thread, uncurled from the swaddling and grasped the fabric of Elena's hospital gown. Elena brought the baby closer, inhaling the scent of her own child. The vast, terrifying emptiness inside her was gone, replaced. She was no longer alone. The soft glow of the small nightlight, a muted amber beacon, carved a hushed sanctuary out of the otherwise sterile hospital room. It cast long, wavering shadows on the pale cream walls, dancing faintly as the city outside breathed its distant, mechanical sigh. The air, crisp and cool, carried a faint, almost clinical scent of antiseptic, subtly sweetened by the delicate, powdery fragrance of new baby. It was a strange, yet comforting duality. The ceaseless hum of the metropolis, usually a constant companion, was now merely a distant memory, a faint vibration against the thick glass of the window, utterly insignificant in the quiet cocoon Elena had found herself in. Here, the only sound that truly mattered, the only sound that truly existed, was the soft, rhythmic breathing of Aliyah, a fragile, precious whisper against the silence. Each gentle intake, each soft exhale was a testament to life, a lullaby woven from sheer existence. Elena sat vigil beside the clear plastic bassinet, her form draped in a fresh, cream-colored hospital gown. The rough yet comforting cotton felt surprisingly soft against her skin, a small mercy in a day devoid of many. Her body ached, a deep, persistent throb originating from the fresh incision of her C-section, radiating outwards like slow, molten lead. Every shift, every small movement sent a jolt of discomfort through her, but the pain felt distant, muted, almost observed from afar, overshadowed and diminished by the profound, almost spiritual calm that had settled deep within her soul. It was a peace born of utter exhaustion and overwhelming love, a protective bubble against the raw edges of her reality. Aliyah, swaddled tightly in a soft white blanket, a tiny, perfect burrito of innocence, stirred faintly in her sleep. Her miniature fingers, barely larger than sunflower seeds, twitched once, then curled gently. Her delicate eyelids, veined with translucent blue, fluttered but remained closed, concealing the new world within. A soft sigh escaped her rosebud lips, a sound so tiny it was almost imperceptible, yet it resonated through Elena's entire being. Aliyah was a miniature masterpiece. Every eyelash, every tiny fold of skin, every soft curl of nascent dark hair, a miracle of design. Elena watched her, mesmerized, a hand hovering protectively, instinctively, over the small, warm bundle. Tips of her fingers tingled with the urge to touch, to confirm the undeniable reality of her daughter. The peaceful silence, however, was a fragile thing, stretched thin like gossamer over a vast chasm. It offered no true escape from the questions that circled relentlessly in the periphery of her mind, sharp-edged and insistent. The cold, stark reality of her situation waited patiently beyond these quiet, temporary walls, a predator biding its time. She had lost everything, not in a slow, gradual erosion, but in a brutal, swift current that had swept her clean. Her home, a sanctuary she had meticulously curated, now a hollow shell. Her work, a thriving career built on years of tireless dedication, now a reputation in tatters. And Marcus, her supposed partner, the one who had sworn loyalty, had proven himself to be a phantom, leaving only wreckage in his wake. The city, once a vibrant tapestry of opportunity, had, in a single, brutal stroke, stripped her bare, leaving her exposed and vulnerable. She was adrift, a vessel without a sail, tossed by unseen currents, facing an uncertain horizon. Yet Aliyah, nestled close, her sweet breath a warmth against the cool air, was her compass. She was her anchor. The weight of her tiny body, the undeniable presence of her new life, tethered Elena to something real, something unshakable. In the quiet depths of her heart, a new resolve began to solidify, hard and unyielding. She knew, with a certainty that transcended exhaustion and pain, that she had to act. There was one call she had avoided, a task she had postponed with a rising dread, one person she feared most to disappoint, whose judgment cut deeper than any other. The thought of his voice, laden with an unspoken expectation, made her stomach clench. Her phone, sleek and dark, a rectangular slab of glass and metal, felt impossibly heavy in her trembling hand. The cool, smooth surface of the screen was a stark contrast to the heat thrumming beneath Elena's skin. Her thumb, hesitant and unsure, scrolled through her contacts, each name blurring into the next until she reached the one that stood out, stark and undeniable. A name that carried the weight of generations, of uncompromising principle, of a lineage that demanded strength above all else. Her breath caught, a dry, rasping sound in her throat as her thumb hovered, suspended just inches above the call icon, an unspoken prayer hanging in the air. The decision, though made, still felt momentous, a leap into the unknown. With a surge of adrenaline, a desperate hope mingled with despair, she pressed call. The line rang once, a sharp, jarring sound in the profound quiet. Then twice, each ring echoing the frantic beat of her own heart. The silence between the rings was almost deafening, a crucible for her anxiety. Just as she considered hanging up, convinced he wouldn't answer, a click, sharp and distinct, broke the tension. A deep, resonant voice answered, calm, measured, unyielding. Elena! The single word, spoken with a precision that was both familiar and chilling, vibrated through the receiver, through her bones. It was a statement, not a question, a recognition devoid of warmth, imbued instead with an almost clinical assessment. Her own voice was a mere whisper, raw with exhaustion and a nascent despair she fought desperately to contain. "Grandfather!" The title felt heavy on her tongue, carrying the full weight of their complex history. A beat of silence stretched between them across the miles, across the chasm of their different worlds. Only Aaliyah's soft snuffles, the gentle shifting of her tiny body in the bassinet, punctuated the quiet, a stark reminder of the fragile, innocent life Elena now held in her arms. I lost everything today." The words tumbled out, faster than she intended, laced with a tremor she couldn't quite mask. Her chin, despite the tremble in her voice, lifted a fraction, a flicker of inherent defiance sparking in her tired eyes. "Marcus, he took it all. The accounts, the apartment, my reputation." She paused, struggling to regain her composure, to infuse her voice with a strength she didn't feel. Then, with a quiet, fierce pride that momentarily eclipsed her pain, she added, "But I have Aaliyah. She's here. She's beautiful." The last two words were a balm to her own soul, a truth that no betrayal could ever diminish. Another silence descended, longer this time. It stretched, taut and brittle, across the miles, an invisible thread connecting her sterile hospital room to his imposing study, wherever he might be. The hospital room suddenly felt very cold, the artificial chill of the air conditioning seeping deeper into her bones, matching the icy dread creeping into her heart. She could almost picture him, his gaze piercing, his expression unreadable, his mind sifting through her words, weighing them, judging them. "And what did you expect, child?" The voice, when it finally came, was a low murmur, a sound that seemed to emanate from the very depths of his being. It was not a question seeking an answer, but a judgment delivered with the finality of an ancient decree. Did you truly believe a life built on shifting sand would not crumble when the tides turned? Did you imagine your house would stand firm on foundations of fleeting pleasures and misplaced trust? His words, each one carefully chosen, struck her with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel, cutting through her defenses, revealing the raw wound beneath. There was no pity, no comfort, only the stark, unvarnished truth as he perceived it. "But grandfather, I have nowhere to go. I have nothing." The plea escaped her lips almost involuntarily, a desperate cry. Tears pricked at her eyes, hot and sudden, blurring the pristine white of Alia's swaddle, threatening to spill over. Her carefully constructed composure began to crack, threatening to shatter. "You have what you've always had, Elena, what every member of our line has always possessed." His voice remained steady, unwavering, a rock against her rising tide of emotion. "Your name, your hands, your mind." He enunciated each word, making them separate, distinct entities, immutable truths. The words held no comfort, no soft embrace, no gentle reassurance she so desperately craved. Only a stark, almost brutal reminder of her inherent resources. "And now you have a legacy, a future that depends entirely on your fortitude. Begin again on solid ground. Build something that will not falter, something worthy of the name you carry." His voice, though devoid of softness, held a strange kind of power, a challenge disguised as counsel. He hung up, just like that, no goodbye, no final word. The connection severed with an abrupt click that resonated through the room. The dial tone hummed, a flat, indifferent sound, a monotonous drone that seemed to mock her fragile hope. Elena stared at the phone, the cold plastic now feeling like a lead weight in her hand, the screen a dark, unreflecting mirror of her despair. The weight of his words settled on her, heavy and chilling, like a shroud woven from icy logic. No rescue, no warm embrace, no comforting platitude. Only a stark, almost brutal reminder of her inherent resources. She was alone, truly alone, in a way she hadn't felt even when Marcus had delivered his final, crushing blow. She lowered the phone slowly, her gaze drifting back to Aaliyah, her perfect, innocent face illuminated by the soft amber light of the nightlight. Aaliyah stirred again, a tiny, almost imperceptible movement. Then, as if sensing her mother's presence, she slowly, deliberately opened her eyes. Wide, dark pools, unfocused yet full of an ancient wisdom, blinked slowly, taking in the muted world around her. Elena's breath hitched. Those eyes, so new, so pure, gazed up at her, utterly trusting. Elena brought her closer, carefully lifting the bassinet's edge, inhaling the sweet, milky scent of her daughter's head, a scent that was uniquely hers, uniquely perfect. A fresh wave of resolve washed over her, a fierce, protective instinct that hardened her jaw. Her strength, like the legacy of this land her grandfather spoke of, is non-negotiable. His words, sharp and unyielding, echoed in the quiet room, devoid of comfort yet rich with a stern ancestral truth. Though left emotionally raw by the call, Elena felt a cold, clear certainty solidify within her. Her grandfather had not abandoned her, but challenged her to reclaim her power. It was as if his presence, long anticipated and now deeply understood, had physically manifested, for just moments later, a new, deliberate sound broke the hospital's gentle hum. A brief moment of stillness permeated the hospital room. A sound, distinct, not part of the hospital's ambient hum. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, approaching from down the corridor. Each soft thud of shoe on linoleum echoed slightly in the quiet space, growing louder with each passing moment. They paused, right outside her door. Elena's heart gave a sudden, hard thump against her ribs. The door handle turned, a faint, metallic click preceding the gentle creak of the door. The door swung inward with a silent, heavy grace. The man who entered did not move with the hesitant deference of a hospital visitor. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a stillness that seemed to bend the room's energy toward him. He wore a charcoal gray overcoat of heavy wool, unbuttoned to reveal a simple, dark, perfectly tailored suit. His hair was a thick, close-cropped crown of silver. His face was a testament to disciplined decades, carved from dark mahogany, with eyes that held the placid, patient authority of a predator at rest. He brought the scent of the cold night air, an expensive old-world cologne, cedar, and something faintly medicinal like wintergreen, cleansing the stale, antiseptic smell from the room. He did not look at Elena. His gaze went at once to the clear plastic bassinet where Alia slept. He moved toward it, his steps measured, his expensive leather shoes making no sound on the linoleum floor. He stopped beside it, a silent, imposing mountain. Behind him, two other men, younger, in sharp, modern suits, slipped into the room and flanked the door. They were silent sentinels. One put a finger to an earpiece, his lips moving without sound. The other held a slim, dark tablet, his thumb scrolling down a page of dense text. They were a part of the first man's shadow, an extension of his will. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird in a cage. Her hand, which had been resting on her stomach, reflexively moved to grip the edge of the thin hospital mattress. The movement sent a sharp, pulling pain across her abdomen, a fierce reminder of the morning surgery. "Grandfather!" The word was a fragile thread of sound in the charged silence. Elias Vance did not turn. He lowered a large, impeccably clean hand and rested it on the corner of the bassinet. The gesture was not tender. It was a claim. He studied the sleeping child, his expression unreadable, his posture unwavering. For a long moment, the only sounds were Alia's soft, rhythmic breaths and the distant, muted scream of a city siren. "She has the Vance chin," he finally said. His voice was a low, resonant baritone, a sound built for boardrooms and quiet, irreversible decisions. Before Elena could process this, could find a question in the swirling vortex of her confusion, the door flew open again, slamming against the rubber stopper on the wall with a violent thud. Marcus Thorne stood framed in the doorway, his dark suit a stark contrast to the cream walls. His face was flushed with victory, his lips already pulled back in a sneer. He was laughing, a loud, booming sound that shattered the room's fragile peace. "Well, well, well," he crowed, striding into the room as if he owned it. He spread his arms wide, a malevolent conductor addressing his orchestra. "A little family reunion. How very touching. I got a call that you were trying to move some funds, a desperate little gambit, so I thought I'd come see the final act of this tragedy myself." His eyes swept the room, dismissing the two men at the door as furniture. He looked at Elias, a long, contemptuous appraisal from head to toe. Don't tell me, Marcus jeered, his voice dripping with condescension. You brought your grandfather to beg for you, Elena. Is he going to offer me a stern lecture on morality? Maybe write a strongly worded letter to the editor? What's the plan, old man? Appeal to my better nature? He laughed again, a harsh, ugly sound. Let me save you the trouble. I don't have one. He circled the bed, a shark in a tank that had become too small. He was a storm of kinetic energy in the still room. You see, your granddaughter has a magnificent flair for the dramatic, a real artist's soul. He said the word artist like it was an infection. But she possesses an almost childlike ignorance of how the world actually works. She trusts people. She believes in things. She signed documents without reading the subclauses. She bet her future on a dream, and I was simply the house, cashing out her chips. That's the way of the world. The strong take, the smart profit, and the weak. Well, the weak are left holding the bill for their own sentimentality. He stopped at the foot of the bed, his gaze fixing on Elena. His smile was a weapon. You look tired, Elena. All your fight gone. It's for the best. Some people are meant to build empires. Others are meant to be the cautionary tales taught in business school. Elias Vance had not moved. He had not flinched. He remained by the bassinet, a figure of profound calm, only now, slowly, did he turn his head to fix his gaze on Marcus. The air in the room grew 10 degrees colder. Mr. Thorne. The sheer, quiet weight of his name on Elias's lips made Marcus pause. Finally decided to join the conversation, he scoffed, though a flicker of unease crossed his face. Got something to say before you shuffle off? Elias took a small step away from the bassinet, positioning himself fully between Marcus and the child. You have built a considerable enterprise. Marcus's confidence surged back. The beginnings of an empire. Viridian Heights is just the start. In 5 years, my name will be on half the new buildings in this city. An impressive ambition, Elias said, his voice flat. There is just one problem. He paused, letting the silence stretch. You built your kingdom on my land. The statement hung in the air. It was so quiet, so devoid of anger, that it took a moment to register. Marcus stared. Then he let out a short, incredulous bark of laughter. Your land? What are you talking about? That parcel was a portfolio acquisition by Apex. We have the title. It's clean. You have a 99-year commercial lease, Elias corrected him, his voice as sharp and precise as a diamond cutter. A lease agreement with my holding company. An agreement which you, through your partner company Apex, breached on 17 separate counts, beginning with illegal dumping 3 months ago. An agreement that my legal team terminated, citing the morals clause, 3 hours ago. The color started to drain from Marcus's face. The arrogant smirk faltered, twitching at the corners. No, that's a lie. We own it. We paid. You paid for a lease, Elias repeated, his patience seemingly infinite, which made it all the more terrifying. My father, Sergeant Major Alistair Vance, bought that parcel of downtown Atlanta with his discharge pay and 2 years of back wages in 1948. Our family does not sell land. Ever. This was the twist, the reframing of everything. Marcus stumbled back a step, his bravado crumbling into dust. He looked at Elena as if seeing her for the first time, a dawning, horrified understanding in his eyes. The mocked architect, the dreamer, the fool. She was not the obstacle, she was the heir. "No," he whispered, the word dry in his throat. "That's impossible. The city zoning, the permits." The man with the tablet stepped forward, his voice calm and professional, a stark contrast to Marcus's fraying composure. The permits were issued based on a fraudulent chain of title claim submitted by Apex Development's legal team. The city attorney's office was notified of the discrepancy 1 hour ago. All permits have been suspended. The other man, the one with the earpiece, spoke for the first time, his voice a low murmur directed at Marcus. "Sir, Mr. Thorne, your CFO, Mr. Davies, is on the line. He says it is urgent." He held out a satellite phone. Marcus stared at the offered phone as if it were a snake. His own phone, his lifeline, vibrated in his pocket, but he didn't reach for it. He knew what he would hear. The calls he had been making all day to secure his final financing, the deals he was closing, were all built on a foundation of sand. Not just sand, someone else's rock. He looked from the impassive faces of Elias's men to Elias himself, who had already turned his attention back to the bassinet, his duty as warden of this conversation apparently done. Then his gaze fell on Elena. She was sitting up straighter now, the pain from her incision a distant echo. Her chin was up, her eyes, clear and steady, held his. There was no triumph in her gaze, no hatred. There was only a quiet, unshakable certainty. She understood now. The stories her grandfather told her as a child, the lessons about building things that last, about the legacy being more than money. The memory surfaced. Her strength, like the legacy of this land, was non-negotiable. He had thrown her own words, her grandfather's words, back in her face as a final insult, never realizing he was speaking a prophecy against himself. Marcus's world, the glittering future he had seen so clearly, fractured into a million pieces. The air was thick, heavy. He felt a desperate need to say something, to rage, to deny, to fight back. But no words came. His entire vocabulary of power and intimidation was useless here. He was a king without a kingdom. His empire had vanished. The hospital room settled into a tense quiet, the air thick with the weight of shattered ambition. With his empire crumbling around him, Marcus Thorne, stripped bare of his illusions of power, had nothing left but the bitter taste of utter destruction. But the private humiliation in the hospital room was merely a prelude to a far more public and ultimately inescapable reckoning. The stage had been set, once more at the very heart of his ambition, where the elements themselves seemed to conspire against the remnants of his shattered reign. The wind screamed, a high, thin tune that moaned through the skeletal steel frame of the Viridian Heights Tower, making the metal ribs of the unfinished floors groan in protest. It was a raw, gusting cold that sliced through wool and resolve alike. The air was thick with the smells of damp, disturbed earth, the sharp chemical tang of ozone from the stressed power lines, and the metallic bite of rust. Puddles of muddy water shivered, reflecting the bruised gray sky. Heavy plastic sheeting, meant to protect unfinished sections, cracked and snapped with reports like gunfire, sounding for all the world like frantic rat birds throwing themselves against their cages. This was the same stage as the first attack, but the audience had changed. The small, sneering crew of construction workers was gone, replaced by a somber semicircle of media, city officials, and legal teams. Their dark, expensive coats formed a stark contrast to the churned, muddy earth, their polished shoes already stained. They stood in a tense, quiet congregation, a flock of vultures waiting for the final act. This was a temple of failed ambition, and they were here for the sermon. Elena arrived, the door of a black town car held open for her. She stepped out, and for a moment, the wind caught the panels of her long, cream-colored wool coat, making it flare out like broken wings. Elias Vance followed, his presence a silent, formidable shield. He moved with an unnerving stillness, an anchor in the buffeting wind. She'd buttoned the coat high against the chill, a futile gesture. Her face was pale, almost translucent, but her jaw was set, a familiar stubbornness in the line of her mouth. "Chin up!" A sudden, vicious gust whipped a strand of dark hair across her face, and she flinched, not at the hair, but at the sharp, pulling sensation from her lower abdomen. Her hand instinctively went to the spot, a brief, protective gesture over the lingering ache of her incision. The thought of Elia, warm and gurgling and safe with a trusted nurse, was a steadying fire in her core. This is not for revenge, she told herself, the words a silent mantra against the wind's howl. This is for her. This is for my future. Marcus Thorne was already there, the disgraced king holding court on his own battlefield. He stood near the colossal, motionless base of the crane, a monument to his own hubris. His dark suit, once a tailored symbol of his power, was now just a costume. It was rumpled, strained at the shoulders, the knot of his silk tie slightly askew as if he'd been tugging at it. There was a sleepless, pasty quality to his skin. His eyes were wild, darting between the reporters and Elias, fueled by a frantic, cornered energy. Cassandra Hayes clung to his arm, a slash of defiant crimson in the gray and brown landscape. A tight red dress, a red coat, belted snugly, red stiletto heels sinking inexorably into the soft, unforgiving mud. Her jewelry, a cascade of gold chains and bracelets, kept up a nervous metallic chatter as she shivered, a sound that was nearly lost in the wind. Her makeup was a perfect, brittle mask. A quiet young man with a familiar face stood near the edge of the crowd, partially shielded by a stack of drywall. Liam Chen! He held his phone in his hand, the screen dark. He wasn't recording. He was waiting, a ghost from the past poised to testify. His stillness was more potent than any of Marcus's frantic movements. Marcus saw Elena, and a surge of his old theatrical arrogance animated him. He took a jerky step forward, pulling away from Cassandra's clutching grip. "There she is. Come to pick over the bones, Elena." His voice was rough, straining to project over the wind's shriek. "This is injustice. They're crushing a self-made man." He gestured wildly to the press pack. "I built this. This is my reward." He was feeding on the attention, his monologue gaining a desperate, feverish momentum. The cameras swiveled to him, then to Elias, who remained as unmoved as the steel tower behind him. "I built this from nothing. I poured my soul into this dirt. I had the vision. I took the risks. She drew the pretty pictures, but I made it real. And for that, this is my reward? To be torn down by the very establishment I fought so hard to join?" Elias took a single, deliberate step forward. The movement was slight, but it commanded the attention of the entire crowd. A hush fell, the wind itself seeming to pause. He did not raise his voice. He did not have to. His tone was low, weighted with the density of granite, and it cut through the air with chilling precision. "You built nothing. You stole a foundation and bragged about the height of the walls." He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod toward Liam Chen. Liam stepped into the clearing. His hands trembled, but his eyes were firm. He did not speak. He simply tapped the screen of his phone and turned the volume to its maximum. The recording was painfully sharp, a high-fidelity ghost in the raw air, the whistle of the wind, the distant clank of steel. And then Marcus's voice, dripping with a contempt so potent it felt fresh, echoing from the past. "Look at her, waddling around like she owns the place. Someone should tell her the only thing she's building right now is in her own belly." The cruel, hollow laughter of the other men followed, a brittle chorus of derision that now hung in the charged silence. A wave of murmurs and sharp intakes of breath washed through the crowd. A reporter from the Atlanta Journal. Constitution scribbled furiously, her pen scratching audibly. Cassandra winced, a full-body flinch, her grip tightening on Marcus's arm as if he might fall. Marcus's face, already pale, turned a mottled shade of gray. The public mockery, his own words, his own smug cruelty, weaponized and turned back on him, was a devastating blow. Before he could recover, a woman in a severe, impeccably tailored gray suit stepped forward from Elias's legal team. She held a tablet, her expression impassive. "We have a sworn affidavit from Mr. Chen," she stated, her voice clipped and devoid of emotion. "We also have a complete forensic accounting of the wire transfers made from Dr. Vance's personal and business accounts into Mr. Thorne's private holding companies. This details a systematic and premeditated plan to defraud Dr. Vance of her assets, using the Viridian Heights project as collateral for personal loans he was securing." She gestured to a man beside her who began handing out slim, damning folders to the press. Marcus stared at the folders being passed around. He saw the charts. He saw the numbers. His numbers, his secret architecture of theft laid bare for the world. The memory surfaced. "My father was a bricklayer. He taught me how to build, how to make things stand." The thought, unbidden, was a flicker of genuine pain in his eyes. He could almost smell the mortar, feel the rough texture of the bricks his father laid with such pride. The memory surfaced. "I just wanted to build taller." It was a grief for the lost dream, for the man he might have been before greed corrupted the foundation. Cassandra saw the game was over. She saw the unconcealed disgust on the faces of the city officials, the cold calculation in the eyes of the reporters. She saw her own future dissolving into the muddy ground. She did the only thing she could. She played her last, desperate card. Letting go of Marcus's arm, she stumbled forward into the center of the circle. Her voice, high and shrill, cut through the wind. "Stop! You can't do this to him! To us!" All eyes turned to her. She placed a hand on her own flat stomach, a grotesque parody of Elena's earlier authentic gesture. "I'm pregnant! I'm carrying Marcus's child! You're destroying a family!" A collective gasp went through the crowd. This was drama they could understand, a new, sordid, and delightfully simple twist. Marcus stared at her, his expression a chaotic mixture of confusion and dawning horror. Elena watched her, her expression unreadable. She took a quiet step forward, the mud sucking at her boots. "No, yous are not Cassandra." Cassandra whirled on her, her face contorted with rage. "You know nothing. You're just a barren woman trying to ruin my family because you couldn't have one of your own. I know you filed a claim on the Apex Development's premium health insurance plan for a full hysterectomy 9 months ago," Elena said, her voice even and clear, each word a cold, precise drop of poison. She didn't look at a paper, she knew it by heart. "The procedure code for a hysterectomy." Dr. Alistair Franklin, Emory University Hospital, Midtown. "I reviewed all project-related insurance filings for our risk mitigation strategy. Your procedure was flagged as a high-cost outlier." The silence that followed was absolute, more profound than any sound. It was more damning than the recording, more brutal than the financial charts. It was a cold, indisputable fact, delivered with surgical precision by the woman Cassandra had sought to replace. Public humiliation has been described as a deeply painful emotion that strikes at the core of a person's identity and can have severe and lasting consequences. Cassandra's face crumpled. The sound she made was a choked animal sob. Her eyes, wide with panic, darted to a distinguished, silver-haired man standing with the city council members. He was watching her, his face a mask of cold fury. "Uncle Robert," she whispered, a desperate, pathetic plea. Councilman Robert Patterson, a man whose family name was woven into the fabric of Atlanta's political history, took a heavy step forward. His voice boomed with a righteous indignation that was both a performance and utterly sincere. "This family has served the city of Atlanta with honor for 3 generations. We do not tolerate fraud. We do not tolerate deceit. You, Cassandra, are a disgrace to our name." He turned his back on her, publicly, irrevocably. That was the final blow. Cassandra collapsed, a heap of red fabric and tarnished gold in the mud, her wail thin and lost in the wind. The air was still. The drama had crested. Marcus stood as a hollow man, a shell. Cassandra was a ruin. A brief moment of quiet shock settled upon the crowd. Elias Vance moved to the center of the circle, where a makeshift podium with the Viridian Heights logo still stood, now looking like a tombstone. He placed a single, leather-bound document on its surface, the original deed from 1948, its parchment-aged, its ink faded. He looked out at the silent, stunned crowd, then his eyes found Elena. He adjusted his spectacles and read from a prepared statement he had placed atop the deed, his voice, now the voice of history, of finality. "There are things that are not for sale. There are foundations that are not negotiable." He paused, looking directly at his granddaughter, the words "now" for her alone, a bridge across decades of silence. Her strength, like the legacy of this land, is non-negotiable. The wind, once a furious shriek, had dwindled to a mournful sigh, stirring the thin plastic sheeting that whipped against the unfinished steel. The air, still sharp with the tang of ozone and damp earth, now carried a new, colder scent, the chill of absolute defeat. Cassandra, a crumpled splash of red against the gray mud, sobbed, her gold jewelry muted. Marcus stood, a figure of frozen horror. His world had not merely fractured, it had disintegrated. The crowd, a shifting mass of journalists and officials, held its breath. They had come for a public reckoning, and it was being delivered in brutal, intimate detail. Councilman Patterson, his back a rigid wall of condemnation, spoke in low tones to his aide. The legal team, grim-faced, exchanged knowing glances. From the back, where she had waited in the periphery, Nia stepped forward. She moved with a measured grace that belied the chaos. She wore a simple, charcoal gray suit dress, its clean lines a stark contrast to Cassandra's flamboyant ruin. Her presence was quiet authority, a silent testament to a world far removed from the petty theatrics of the site. She carried a small, intricately embroidered shawl held close to her chest. Beneath it, a bundle stirred, a faint, contented gurgle reaching the strained silence. Marcus saw her, and a fresh wave of pallor washed over his face. His eyes, already wild, now held a desperate, terrified plea. This was not the audience he had planned. This was not the judge he could manipulate. Nia's gaze, clear and steady, swept over Cassandra, a flicker of something unreadable in their depths. Not anger, not pity, but a cold, surgical assessment. Then her eyes settled on Marcus. There was no theatricality in her, no accusations, just a deep, abiding sorrow etched around her mouth. Elena watched her, a hand pressed to her own abdomen. The ache of her incision was a dull throb, a counterpoint to the sharp sting of the wind on her cheeks. She understood the weight of that bundle Nia carried, the silent, profound statement it made. Nia stopped before Marcus, close enough for him to smell the faint, sweet scent of baby lotion and linen that clung to her. She looked at the infant in her arms, a tiny, serene face peeking from the shawl. Marcus reached out a trembling hand. "Mia, I can explain!" His voice was a raw whisper, stripped of its former bluster. Nia did not flinch. She simply shifted the baby, a subtle movement that conveyed a vast, unbridgeable distance. The woman from Elias's legal team, the one with the severe gray suit, consulted her tablet. "Mr. Thorne," she began, her voice crisp. "The district attorney's office has just issued a warrant for your arrest on multiple counts of fraud, embezzlement, and racketeering. The SEC has also frozen all Apex Development's assets. Federal marshals are en route." She gestured towards a black sedan pulling onto the muddy access road. Marcus's head snapped towards the car. Hope, thin and desperate, flared in his eyes. "A way out." "Apex Developments," Elias Vance intoned, his voice resonating with finality, "will be fully dissolved. Its assets, once liquidated, will be placed into a trust. This trust will oversee the completion of the Viridian Heights project, respecting the original architectural vision, with Dr. Vance at its helm." His pronouncement hung in the frigid air, an iron decree. The reporters began to stir, cameras clicking again. The future, sudden and clear, shimmered into view. Marcus turned back to Nia, his face contorted. "This isn't fair. This is all her fault." He pointed a shaking finger at Elena. Elena met his gaze, her chin held high. She remembered the ridicule, the casual cruelty of his words, the humiliation. But triumph was a hollow thing now. She felt only a quiet resolve for Aaliyah. Nia's voice was soft, barely audible above the wind, yet it cut through the noise with chilling precision. "You built a house of cards." Marcus recoiled, as if physically struck. The truth of her words, delivered with such quiet devastation, was a deeper wound than any legal blow. He had nothing left. His reputation was ash. His company, a ghost. His freedom, a fleeting memory. His family, an alien landscape. He saw the approaching federal marshals, their stern faces framed by the car windows. He saw Elias Vance, impassive, a guardian of ancestral land. He saw Elena pale but unbroken, a symbol of everything he had tried to crush. He saw Liam Chen watching him with quiet, unwavering eyes, a witness to all. And then he saw Nia holding their newborn, her face a mask of grief and profound distance. He had built nothing. He had simply destroyed. The marshals stepped out of the black sedan, their movements swift and practiced. They approached Marcus, their presence undeniable. His final breath hitched, his shoulders slumped. Elena, despite the raw ache in her belly, despite the exhaustion, felt a surge of strength. She thought of Aaliyah, warm and secure, nestled far from this cold, bitter scene. She thought of the legacy, not of brick and mortar, but of principle. She looked at her grandfather, whose quiet strength had been the bulwark against the storm. Elias met her gaze. He gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. Her strength, like the legacy of this land, is non-negotiable. Nia turned, the newborn cradled gently in her arms. She walked forward, away from the ruin, toward a new, uncertain horizon. A new dawn broke,